Welcome back. You're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Swish Data and Checkpoint Software Technologies on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Bill Vita, the Interior Department's Chief Information Officer, and Jack Donnelly, the Interior Department's Chief Information Security Officer. Before break, we started to talk a little bit about this idea of the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program. Jack, you brought up this idea of, 10 years ago, there was a big difference between maybe on-prem and in the cloud. Today, however, there's less of that difference. And that actually is a great segue to a diagnostic and reporting framework that I think you guys are developing. It's going to have some dashboards, give you guys a broader view of risk. Jack, lead us off. Help me understand what this dashboard looks like and how are you guys going to use it to measure risk?
So thank you very much for the question, by the way. I think it's very easy to think of the challenges that we have in terms of a dashboard, and it shouldn't be any more complex than that. And what I mean by that in a non-cybersecurity and computer perspective is this. When you have a dashboard in front of you and you're sitting in front of a car, you have a speedometer. You would hope that that speedometer measures how fast you're going in terms of accuracy there. But if it isn't, that's when you have a problem is what data are you turning around and examining, and what are you looking at, and why is it interesting to you? From a cybersecurity perspective, when we're doing development of dashboards, how do you get this immense field of data in the volumes that are out there and get it to be in a dashboard that you could act upon? Take a look at the data, quickly assess, give that information to the decision makers, and then turn around and do something about it. Otherwise, enable a cyber defense feature, go into incident response, go after the threat, go hunting after the threat. And that is a developing field, and you're going to see some advanced things happen from a data analytic perspective and a data management perspective. And why is that important? Well, frankly, it's important at the end of the day because the data that we have, there's so much of it that we need machine learning and AI to parse through the majority of it because we have a small number of analysts that can look at the dashboard. The dashboard also has to be measurable in certain sense. Does that risk make sense to the analyst? Does that risk make sense to the decision maker? How I process information and how Bill processes information versus how the analyst processes information, it's at different levels, and we got to have information fed to us in that format. And so when we talk about risk has to be in practical terms. Now, we understand it from a home perspective. What's the risk to our house? Is it being burglarized? Is there a fire? What do you have to turn around and react to? And cyber risk has to be quantified in similar measures. For example, if I tell you system X is risk 5, you're going to turn around and says, I don't understand what that means from a dashboard perspective. I have no context to it and I can't make a decision. And that data point isn't very relevant to me. But if I turn around and say, look, I have a $1,000 asset and I have a $500 risk. Otherwise, that asset may diminish in value by half. And that's a risk, and that's quantified that way. You're going, well, if I only have $1,000, I don't want to lose half my investment. And that's a blatantly easy decision to make. So what you're seeing is a quick evolution of data streaming in to processes that quantify risk in values like dollar figures. Because when you make a multi-million dollar investment, a risk of $1 doesn't mean anything. We manage that. A risk of $100 doesn't mean anything, and we manage that. A risk of $200,000, that's when it becomes more relevant to us. And so when you express risk in quantified measures, it makes the decision process from a decision maker perspective much easier. And tell you the truth, the cyber warriors out there have to learn how to speak this way. You talked about training earlier. This is one of the ways going, how do you express risk? Not in 1, not in 2, not in 5, but what's the number and how do you get attention to the problem that you need to the people who don't work with IT and the people who don't work in the cybersecurity field?
One of the biggest challenges has always been is proving the negative. Well, we did this, or we use this tool, or we add this capability, and we will stop the cyber attackers. Well, how much? 10%, 30%, 50%? And I think this is part of that discussion is how do you understand, how do you talk in a way that non-technical people can go, okay, I get that. And I see the value of whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's an investment or a new tool or a decision being made. Where are you with the dashboard, or is it out there? Is it in pilot mode? Give me a sense.
So we are there from a dashboard perspective. It's just a matter of how much dashboard do we want and how sophisticated do we want to make it. The idea of getting this data and making risk-based decisions, it's true. Are we preventing bad things from happening to us? Yes, that's part of the answer. But the other part is how do we make smart IT investments, also from a security perspective? And I'll use one example, data loss prevention. I think when we first started in data loss prevention, and just 5 years ago, that when you bought a multi-million-dollar solution, we could say less bad things were happening, but we weren't able to turn around and prove it. We're keeping intellectual property within the enterprise, and we're keeping it from going to the outside, because from a reputational perspective, it's terrible risk and we shouldn't do it. We're at the point now where we use the dashboard saying, look, when we put data loss prevention in, I could tell you how much data was leaving the enterprise before that investment. After the investment's being made, I could tell you where we're blocking and protecting at the internet, where we're blocking and protecting within the main infrastructure, and then where we're blocking and protecting at the endpoint. And there's a data point before and after in a snapshot picture. It's just like those views of what the neighborhood looked like 50 years ago versus now, right? You take either two and you're going, wow, I see a noticeable difference. That's how the dashboard should work, and that's what we're getting to. And you're gonna see that streamlined process and that easy access to information help us make IT investments.
Bill, we've had a great conversation about security, but I'm sure there's much more going on across the Interior Department besides security. We've talked a little about cloud, network modernization, but walk me through some of your other priorities. What are you trying to get done over the next 6 or 9 months beyond, obviously, security?
Well, we have very active operational requirements all the time. You can imagine it's wildfire season. We want to make sure that we're protecting the nation's lands from wildfire, as well as we're using them as opportunities to remediate them. We've got X number of active volcanoes that we track, has a direct impact on air traffic control. We've got X number of earthquakes or floods, or you can imagine all kinds of different things going on that provide emergency management support to the American people. We have lots of different science missions that are underway all the time. We have people recreating, and so making sure that those are the best possible experiences for the American public and the people who are taking part in all those activities is our #1 goal all the time. I think the things within our part of the world are really trying to capture the silver lining from this COVID contingency. You know, it moved us at a far more accelerated pace into the kind of opportunities that we're enjoying now, these kind of online collaborations and these online communications in a way that wasn't really fully exercised before. You know, in my career, I've gone from a move from proprietary to open systems, from open systems to internet-based, web-based data, into mobility. And this moment feels to me a lot like those. It feels like when collaboration tools, when video teleconferencing, when communications became ubiquitous and part of normal operations every day. It's something that, in spite of the fact that we might have initiated all of that because of a terrible calamity that the world was facing with the pandemic, that we still proved that we can effectively work this way. And we don't want to lose the best things that we've learned along the way simply because there's no dire emergency facing us. We want to be able to find some way to capture these lessons learned, these best practices, and use them to make our service delivery even better. And so that's going to be our focus in the year to come.
There's a ton there to follow up with, Bill, but unfortunately, we're going to say we're out of time for today because, well, we are out of time. And I'll definitely have you and Jack back on in the near future. But so let me thank my guests, Bill Vita, the Interior Department's Chief Information Officer, and Jack Donnelly, the Interior Department's Chief Information Security Officer. I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Swish Data and Checkpoint Software Technologies on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Ask the CIO.